What a week to finally reveal his energy plan. As energy price rises threaten to push millions more into poverty, Boris Johnson is at Hinkley C in Somerset with a big bet to wean Britain off expensive gas imports by going nuclear.
This is the home of nuclear energy. We first split the atom in the UK. We had the first civilian nuclear power plant. We're bringing nuclear home with one nuclear plant and one nuclear reactor every year for 8 years rather than one a decade.
The government hopes to approve up to 8 new nuclear reactors by 2030 in England and Wales. 2 of them here at Sizewell in Suffolk on the existing site. Critics say nuclear is slow and costly.
The reason nuclear stations are quite expensive is the scale of them. You can see here at Sizewell B, it's a fantastic engineering project, but it does take a lot of work to build it. But the main advantage is once it is built, you will get that 80 years or so of safe, reliable generation, so a very long life cycle.
Why does the reactor have to be circular?
So Boris Johnson, back at the one plant that's actually getting started, is hoping smaller nuclear reactors, which don't exist in the UK yet, can be delivered more quickly. But can he deliver where a long list of prime ministers could not? The UK government is also banking on offshore wind. They want 5 times more generation by 2030. And while the UK is already a world leader here, this isn't a quick fix either. Projects can drag for years, so the government wants to speed things up by tearing up planning laws. And planning laws are even more of an obstacle to onshore wind projects. But the government's pointedly not reforming planning for onshore wind. It's a toxic issue for many Tory MPs dating back to the David Cameron days. The so-called green crap was cut. Tough new planning laws in 2015 made new onshore wind projects in England, critics say, virtually impossible. In Scotland, the wind blows stronger and planning is devolved. This colossal project spans 3 council areas in central Scotland. There is nothing else on this scale, not in England or anywhere else on these islands. And in fact, Scotland produces the majority of the UK's onshore wind. It's cheap and quick, but the UK government isn't setting a target for onshore wind in England. Instead, talk of a sort of cashback for a limited number of communities if they support local projects. So what's the wind industry saying?
The energy security strategy is a mixed bag. On the one hand, we've seen a very welcome increase in the ambition for offshore wind. On the other hand, we've seen a rather disappointing failure to commit to larger targets for onshore wind. So the failure to commit to that means that we're not going to see a decrease in bills and reliance on gas that we otherwise would have done.
There'll be new licences to drill for more oil and gas in the North Sea too. Days after another international report warned that current global production is already way too much. But there's something huge, largely missing from this strategy, reducing our energy use. Labour says the government's not announced a penny more on energy efficiency today.
Heating demand has dropped by 80%, and we've even got some tenants who have not turned on their heating at all since we've carried out these works.
Amazing. These Glasgow flats got an insulation and efficiency makeover. For their architect, it's a shortcut to slashing household energy bills. He's baffled the government isn't doing more.
And I hear good intent from politicians, but no way do I actually see it manifesting itself in reality. Legislation is changing, but at a snail's pace. The politicians make incredible kind of sound bites, but on the ground, we're seeing nothing really happen.
The Prime Minister says there's already support with the cost of living and reducing energy use. A strategy then, says the government, to secure homegrown energy for tomorrow rather than help for households today. But how deep are public reserves of patience? Many families and businesses who are already wondering how they will cope with soaring energy prices won't have found many immediate answers in today's energy security strategy. Emily Wither has been meeting some of the people who say unless they get more help right now, they don't know how they'll keep going.
Critics say, however the government spins it, there's little help for families and businesses struggling to pay their bills now. This laundrette in North London has served the community for 60 years. Anya says it's cheaper now for her customers to do their laundry here than at home. But that might change if they're forced to push rising costs onto the customer.
I think looking at the tax side of things, is there any tax reliefs like they did when the pandemic was here? Rates relief, something like that, to sort of try and get you through the period of uncertainty. But again, it goes back to that they knew this was coming. And why did they leave it?
Is the business going to survive this year?
I don't know. We got through the pandemic because we were classed as a necessary service, but I don't know if we're going to get through this, on the back of that.
For Stephanie, the cost of doing laundry is a huge worry. Her bills have already doubled since last year, and her children have complex needs.
It's not unusual for me to do 3 or 4 loads a day. His bedding, my daughter's bedding, loads of, lots of clothing. It's just constantly, there's not a time, day or night, that my laundry is not in use. I mean, we can't afford to make any more cuts, really. We don't have a social life. We don't go out. I'm having to, think very carefully before I turn on the heating. It's been a very cold snap recently, and I've been scared to turn my heating on.
The heating is off for half-term at Queen Elizabeth Girls' School, but keeping the school running is still on head teacher Violet Walker's mind. Even replacing a light bulb is tough these days. Money is tight.
Well, we've got about a year left of our Gazprom 3-year contract.
Gazprom is the Russian state-owned energy giant, and until recently, one of the recommended suppliers for public institutions.
We've been advised by the DFE to terminate contracts as long as we can ensure value for money and it's legally compliant. But because we've been locked into a 3-year contract, there's no way that if we terminated the contract, we would find any deal that was as near value for money as that one has been.
And what impact is this going to have on the school?
That's going to mean cutting costs somewhere else. What we need is some financial support from the government, really. It's great to be looking to the future and having an energy strategy, talking about nuclear energy, but what we need now is support for schools on the ground.
For Violet, like many, impossible choices are being made, and today's long-term plan is of little help to her now.
Well, the Business and Energy Secretary has given a series of interviews today to mark the government's new strategy. However, his department said that neither he nor any of his ministers were able to speak to Channel 4 News. Well, I am joined by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, who was Energy Secretary under the Conservative Lib Dem coalition in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, and he warned then about European reliance on Russian gas supplies. Ed Davey, is the lesson from that people weren't listening to Ed Davey?
Well, you can draw that lesson. I'm particularly worried about people's bills. The government have had 2 chances in the last 10 days with a spring statement in this energy policy to provide help to people suffering from soaring energy bills and the cost of living crisis, and they didn't take either. That's totally negligent. They don't seem to care about families and pensioners and businesses that are being hit by these high energy costs. And this programme they've outlined won't help at all. Even the government have admitted that it won't bring bills down for 5 years. I don't think it'll bring bills down at all. Liberal Democrats want to help people suffering. We've got proposals for increasing warm home discount, which helps the most vulnerable. We would slash VAT to give a tax cut, and we'd want to insulate people's homes so that they don't have to use so much gas for heating.
Sure. If I can just cut in, I mean, because the Lib Dems today have complained about this nuclear levy on people's bills, but weren't you the Energy Secretary who negotiated that deal with EDF on Hinkley Point that included that nuclear levy that you're now complaining about?
A totally different levy, actually. The great thing about the deal we did is that nothing's paid for years. What the Tories are doing is putting a levy on now. So before any power is produced, people will be paying lots of money up front.
You were in favour of a levy on people's bills back then.
No, there's
you were
no
all
levy
in favour of it then, weren't you, a levy on bills?
Sorry, there's no levy on people's bills from that decision, not yet, because it's not been built. And the way we structured the deal was to protect the consumer. The Tories have ripped that up, and they're putting the levy on the bills up front. So people will face higher bills because of Boris Johnson's nuclear ambitions before any power plant is built. It's utterly crazy. The government ought to be investing.
But you had nuclear ambitions. But you had nuclear ambitions too, didn't you? You were there outlining plans for a number of new reactors, and only one of them has actually come about.
Well, actually, my focus, the Liberal Democrat focus, was on renewables and energy insulation. We made Britain the world leader in offshore wind. We needed quadrupled renewable power, and that's turning out to be far cheaper, far cheaper than nuclear. And that's my concern. If you want cheaper energy more quickly, that's also more secure as well as more green, you need renewables, you need to invest in energy insulation. What the government have gone for with this massive nuclear expansion is the reverse.
Can I ask you, as the wind and everything else dumps on us here, can you explain what's going on with onshore energy? Why the government seems so reluctant to pursue that?
Well, Liberal Democrats managed to build lots of onshore wind. We had to fight the Conservatives who tried to stop us. The Conservatives have always been against this, and I can never think why, because it's the cheapest source of electricity now, and it's green. It means we're independent from importing fuels from people like Vladimir Putin. And I think the government's being negligent. I think it doesn't seem to care about the price of energy that people are paying by rejecting this cheap form of renewable energy, which could be put up pretty quickly. The government are consigning families and pensioners to higher energy bills. It's just wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Tory party documents leaked to the media appear to show that ambitious plans for a massive expansion of onshore wind capacity were substantially watered down after a last-minute revolt by some backbenchers opposed to what they see as unsightly wind farms. Well, let's get more from our political correspondent, Liz Bates. Liz.
Yes, Kieran, as you say, this energy strategy, it's been delayed, and I think largely because of those disagreements that have been going on behind the scenes on onshore wind. It was only a few weeks ago that we understood that the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, had huge ambitions for the sector. Well, I think they were killed off in part by the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, who over the weekend described onshore wind farms as an eyesore, and as you say, we've seen that watered down today. Another area of contention has been energy efficiency. The government say that there was already a £6 billion fund in place for that, but I think disappointment today among environmental campaigners, among others, who wanted to see more support for that. The suggestion has been that it was the Treasury pushing back against that, and it does seem like Rishi Sunak has won that battle.
Speaking of the Treasury, Liz, the tax affairs of the Chancellor's wife, Akshta Murthy, have been under scrutiny today. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, she's very wealthy. Her father is a billionaire. She's personally very wealthy. What we didn't know about her until very recently, though, is that she's also a non-dom, and that means that she doesn't pay UK taxes on income earned abroad, and that includes on dividends that she receives from her father's company, which is based in India, and are understood to be worth millions of pounds every year. Now, the reason that's been given for that by a spokesperson is that she is an Indian citizen, and that she can't at the same time be a UK citizen, and that because of that she's treated under British law as non-domiciled. Now, it's important to say that this arrangement is entirely legal, but that hasn't stopped people criticising it, and one of those people has been today the Labour leader.
He's introduced 15 tax rises, and he says all of this is necessary, there's no option. If it now transpires that his wife has been using schemes to reduce her own tax, then I'm afraid that is breathtaking hypocrisy.
Yes, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has said repeatedly that he doesn't believe that his wife should be subject to this level of scrutiny and criticism just because of his position, and the Prime Minister has backed him up on that today. He told reporters, keep family out of it. I think among all this, just stepping back, it's important to remember that Rishi Sunak over the past couple of years has been a very popular figure among his party and among the public as well. Well, that's all changed drastically in the past couple of weeks. His personal poll ratings have plummeted, and this issue, which does not seem like it's going to go away anytime soon, is certainly not going to help him recover.